Everything around the Pittsburgh Steelers right now points to a franchise quietly but decisively moving into a new phase. And it starts with how the outside noise is finally beginning to catch up to what's actually happening inside the building. For months, national voices questioned the direction of this team, questioned the Mike McCarthy hire, and questioned whether Pittsburgh was settling for comfort instead of ambition. Now, even some of the loudest critics are reversing course, and that shift matters more than it might seem at first glance. Colin Cowherd is a perfect example. He spent a long time dismissing the McCarthy hire, boiling it down to playoff droughts and surface-level narratives. But after digging deeper into the resume, the wins, and the actual production, he changed his tone completely. The comparison he used may have sounded silly on the surface, but the message underneath was clear. Mike McCarthy's problem has never been results. It's been perception. When you strip away branding and media narratives, McCarthy's record stacks up with coaches who are routinely treated as elite, similar playoff numbers, comparable regular season success, the same number of Super Bowl titles, yet the public conversation treats them very differently. That matters in Pittsburgh because this hire was never about winning a press conference. It was about structure. It was about modernizing how the Steelers operate on offense and how decisions are made behind the scenes. The contrast to the previous era is real. Mike Tomlin's greatest strength was culture and leadership, and the locker room adored him. Players were emotional when he stepped away, and that tells you everything about his impact as a motivator. But football evolves, and the Steelers clearly believed it was time to lean harder into analytics, into offensive innovation, and into a coaching staff built to maximize that vision. Look at what McCarthy has assembled: a more modern offensive approach, a defensive coordinator in Patrick Graham who represents a clear philosophical shift from what Terrell Austin and the previous staff were running, assistants like James Campen on the offensive line and Joe Witt Jr. in the secondary, all pointing toward a staff that feels deeper, more specialized, and more aligned. Internally, this is being viewed as one of the strongest coaching groups the Steelers have had in a long time, and that belief is starting to echo beyond Pittsburgh. At the same time, the quarterback conversation is no longer speculation driven by silence. Reports indicate that both the Steelers and Aaron Rodgers are openly receptive to a reunion. That wording matters. When both sides are open, things tend to move forward. Rodgers is described as being in a much better place after his time in Pittsburgh, refreshed compared to recent years, and that lines up with the quiet but meaningful connections he's maintained. Multiple conversations with Mike McCarthy, ongoing communication with DK Metcalf, discussions with Cam Hayward, those aren't casual check-ins. Those are the kinds of conversations that happen when there's a shared vision for what comes next. The idea that Rodgers might actually improve in year 2 isn't as far-fetched as it sounds. Continuity matters. Comfort in a system matters. Familiarity with McCarthy's scheme matters, especially when compared to what the offense looked like under Arthur Smith. If the Steelers commit to improving the wide receiver room and putting the right pieces around him, there's a real belief that Rodgers can operate at a higher level than people expect, even at this stage of his career. That belief extends beyond the quarterback position. Kenny Gainwell's situation is another key thread. He's headed toward free agency, but the reporting suggests he would welcome a return to Pittsburgh. The Steelers are expected to push to re-sign him, though it won't come at a discount this time. Even so, the projected numbers are reasonable, and his value goes beyond basic stat lines. His role in the passing game was crucial, especially given the limitations of the wide receiver group. Pairing him with Jaylen Warren gave the offense flexibility and reliability, and that combination becomes even more important if Rodgers is under center again. There's a strong sense that if Rodgers returns, Gainwell will be one of the players he advocates for most strongly. Then there's Adam Thielen, a name that adds another layer of intrigue. Officially retired, but openly acknowledging that a Rodgers return could pull him back onto the field. Physically and mentally, he believes he can still play. The idea here isn't Thielen as a primary option, but as a savvy veteran, a slot presence who understands how Rodgers likes routes run and how timing-based offenses function. On the right kind of deal, that kind of experience has real value. At the same time, there's no panic if he stays retired, because the bigger priority remains upgrading the receiver room overall. What stands out most is the consistent theme of leadership. Teammates want Rodgers back. That's been echoed by voices across the locker room, not just because of his arm talent, but because of the way he teaches, the way he prepares, the way he brings younger players into the process. Film sessions, midweek explanations, competing in practice, those details matter, and they resonate inside a building trying to balance winning now with building for what's next. All of this paints a picture of a Steelers organization that isn't chasing headlines, but is very intentionally aligning coaching, quarterback leadership, and roster construction. The national narrative may finally be shifting, but inside Pittsburgh, this plan has been forming for a while. The question now isn't whether change is happening, it's whether this version of the Steelers can take the next step if the key pieces fall into place. So with everything pointing in this direction, how do you feel about the Steelers embracing Mike McCarthy's vision and potentially running it back with Aaron Rodgers leading this team forward? The continuation of this story really comes down to how all these threads connect, because none of this is happening in isolation. The coaching staff overhaul, the openness to Aaron Rodgers returning, the push to retain Kenny Gainwell, and even the possibility of Adam Thielen reconsidering retirement all point to one clear mindset inside the Steelers organization. This team believes it is closer than the outside world thinks, and it is trying to maximize a specific window rather than reset everything from scratch. When you look deeper at the Rodgers situation, what stands out is not just that he might come back, but why the Steelers are comfortable with that idea. Rodgers is not being viewed as a short-term bandage or a desperate move. Internally, there's a belief that year 2 in Pittsburgh could be significantly smoother than year 1. Continuity in terminology, trust with teammates, and familiarity with Mike McCarthy's offensive structure all matter, especially for a quarterback who wins with processing, timing, and precision rather than pure mobility at this stage of his career. The idea that age alone defines his ceiling ignores how much cleaner an offense can look when everyone is speaking the same football language. That's also why the conversations Rodgers has had with players like DK Metcalf and Cam Hayward are so telling. Those are leaders on opposite sides of the ball, and those discussions suggest alignment, not recruitment. It's about understanding expectations, accountability, and what the standard needs to be if this team wants to compete at a high level. Quarterbacks who are disconnected don't invest that kind of time. Quarterbacks who are planning something do. Kenny Gainwell's potential return fits perfectly into that same picture. His value to this offense wasn't flashy, but it was foundational. The Steelers leaned heavily on their running backs in the passing game, especially when separation from wide receivers was inconsistent. Gainwell's ability to contribute as both a runner and a reliable receiving option gave the offense balance and flexibility. Pairing him with Jaylen Warren stabilized the backfield, and the projected contract numbers make it clear this isn't about overpaying for sentiment, it's about continuity and efficiency. If Rodgers is back, having a running back he trusts in protection, checkdowns, and design screens becomes even more important. The Adam Thielen angle adds a layer of nuance rather than certainty. His comments weren't a demand or a promise, but they were honest. He feels physically and mentally capable of playing, and Rodgers returning would be the deciding factor. That alone tells you how much respect he has for Rodgers as a quarterback and a leader. The Steelers aren't looking at him as a savior or a centerpiece. The value would be in experience, route discipline, and understanding how to operate within a timing-based offense. On a minimal deal, that kind of presence can elevate younger players in the room without blocking long-term development. And if it doesn't happen, the front office clearly understands that adding new weapons remains a priority. What really ties everything together is the locker room sentiment. Reports consistently indicate that players want Rodgers back. Not just veterans, but leaders who understand what it takes to win in January. They've seen the preparation, they've felt the difference in meetings and practices, they've watched him teach the game in a way that doesn't always exist in today's NFL. That matters in a season where the Steelers are trying to blend experience with evolution under a new coaching regime. The broader point here is that Pittsburgh is no longer operating reactively. The McCarthy hire, the staff he's assembled, and the roster conversations happening now all reflect a more deliberate approach. There's an emphasis on analytics without losing football fundamentals. There's an emphasis on offensive clarity without abandoning physical identity. And there is a clear respect for leadership and teaching, not just raw talent. This is why the national narrative changing around Mike McCarthy is more than just media noise. It validates what the Steelers believed when they made the hire. It reinforces the idea that perception doesn't always match reality, and that results, structure, and alignment matter more than headlines. If the quarterback situation resolves the way it appears to be trending, and if the supporting pieces fall into place, this version of the Steelers could look very different from what critics expect. Now, it comes down to you. With the coaching staff rebuilt, the door open for Aaron Rodgers to return, and key contributors like Kenny Gainwell potentially staying in Pittsburgh, do you believe this direction gives the Steelers their best chance to compete right now? Or do you think the team should be thinking differently about the future? And this is where the conversation naturally gets even more interesting. Because once you accept that the Steelers are intentionally leaning into this window, every decision starts to feel connected. This is no longer about isolated moves or rumors floating around in February. This is about an organization that believes alignment finally exists from the top down, and that belief is shaping everything that comes next. Mike McCarthy's presence changes the gravity of the room. Players know exactly what kind of offense he wants to run, and more importantly, they know there is a clear identity attached to it. That clarity hasn't always been there in recent seasons. When players talk about McCarthy's approach, What stands out is structure. Practices have purpose. Meetings are detailed. Adjustments are explained, not just demanded. That's a big reason why veterans have bought in so quickly, and why younger players are being asked to absorb more responsibility instead of just reacting on Sundays. If Aaron Rodgers does return, he becomes the on-field extension of that structure, not just because of his experience, but because of how he prepares. Multiple players have already pointed to the way he teaches football during the week. Film sessions that go longer than scheduled, walkthroughs where route depth, leverage, and timing are explained in real time. That kind of quarterback elevates everyone around him, even if the box score doesn't always scream MVP, and that's exactly why the Steelers see more upside in year 2 than they did in year 1. The offense, as it's being built, is clearly designed to be quarterback-friendly without being simplistic. Running backs matter in the passing game. That's why Kenny Gainwell remains such a focal point internally. His chemistry with Rodgers, his reliability in space, and his understanding of protection schemes give the offense answers when defenses take away the first read. Pairing him with Jaylen Warren isn't flashy, but it's effective, and it allows the Steelers to stay balanced even when the wide receiver room doesn't dominate matchups. That wide receiver room is still the biggest variable, and the Steelers know it. The Adam Thielen discussion highlights that awareness. This isn't nostalgia or chasing names. It's about fit. Thielen understands timing routes, option concepts, and how to adjust on the fly with a veteran quarterback. As a complementary piece, he could help stabilize key situations, especially on third down and in the red zone. At the same time, the front office knows that relying solely on aging veterans isn't sustainable, which is why adding new talent remains part of the broader plan. Defensively, there's also a quiet confidence building. Patrick Graham's influence is already being felt in how the unit communicates and disguises looks. The goal isn't to reinvent the defense, but to make it more adaptable, fewer predictable alignments, more situational flexibility. That matters in a conference where quarterbacks punish static schemes. With leaders like Cam Hayward anchoring the culture, the defense isn't losing its edge, it's refining it. What keeps coming up over and over is trust. Trust between coaches and players. Trust between veterans and younger guys. Trust that this isn't a half measure or a temporary experiment. The Steelers aren't pretending this is a rebuild, and they're not panicking either. They're threading a very specific needle, trying to compete now while still laying groundwork for what comes next. And that's why the locker room support for Rodgers is so important. This isn't a front office only idea. Players believe he gives them the best chance to win. They believe his leadership raises the weekly standard. They believe the offense can function at a higher level with him at the center of it. That kind of internal consensus doesn't guarantee success, but it absolutely matters when things get difficult during the season. So now the Steelers are at a crossroads that doesn't feel chaotic, but deliberate. Bring back Rodgers